A warm welcome to our policy podcast, Building Wealth, Building Community, hosted by Duncan and Andy from the Social Enterprise Scotland policy team. Social enterprises and other types of inclusive democratic business models are building a better economy across urban and rural Scotland. We'll be talking about some of the big policy issues of the day and, crucially, the real-world impacts in our local communities.
Hello, welcome back. This is Building Wealth, Building Community with me, Andy Patterson, and
Me, Duncan Thorpe.
And today, Duncan, we have a new cabinet. We have a new government.
We do.
Isn't that exciting?
It is, yes. This is the best time of the year for policy people.
Yeah, completely. So what we'll be doing today for you all is we'll be going through who the new cabinet are, what their roles are, and where they'll touch on social enterprise. So currently, we have John Swinney, MSP, for First Minister. We have Jenny Gill-Ruth, MSP, Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government. We have Angela Constance, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Care. Stephen Flynn, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Economy, Tourism and Transport. Neil Gray, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Justice. Gillian Martin, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Rural Affairs. Mary McCallan, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Education, Culture and Gaelic. And Ivan McKee, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reform. And Shirley Ann Somerville, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice and Housing. So that's the Cabinet right there. And then onto the kind of junior ministers. We have Tom Arthur, MSP, Minister for Business and Fair Work. Siobhan Brown, MSP, Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise. Jim Fairley, MSP, Minister for Agriculture, Marine and the Islands. Stephen Gethis, MSP, Minister for Europe, External Affairs and Energy. Hannah Mary Goodlad, MSP, Minister for Public Finance. Jamie Hepburn, MSP, Minister for Parliamentary Business and Veterans. Samita Kumar, MSP, Minister for Equalities and International Development. Ben McPherson, MSP, Minister for Innovation, Technology and Tertiary Education. Kirsten Oswald, MSP, Minister for Victims and Community Safety. Alison Thewlis, MSP, Minister for Community Care. And Marie Todd, MSP, Minister for Mental Wellbeing, Public Health, Sport, Alcohol and Drugs. So that's our cabinet. It's slightly smaller cabinet than the one we had last parliamentary term in government. So we'll go through each of their portfolios and kind of specifically mention some who will have a much bigger involvement with social enterprise. We have a dedicated minister for social enterprise this year, or this next 5 years, I should say. So before we get started, there's some new faces in there, Duncan. Do you have any quick reflections on who you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because obviously there's a lot of new folk in Parliament, 64 new MSPs I think it is in total, so there's a lot of new Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers as a result of that. So obviously there's people like Stephen Flynn is a good example, former MPs in particular in the SNP, as well as, former party activists, people from different industries as well.
So there's some continuity within this cabinet then, to be fair. So it's not everybody's first time doing these things. New ministers and cabinet secretaries that we have will have previous experience being an MP or being involved at local authority level. So, for example, the Minister for Equalities and International Development, Samita Kumar, was heavily involved with Edinburgh City Council. So the cabinet secretaries and ministers that we'll quickly focus on here. So Stephen Flynn, the Cabinet Secretary for Economy, Tourism and Transport, and then his junior minister is Tom Arthur. So they will be involved specifically with social enterprise. Tom Arthur, within his ministerial responsibilities, specifically has social enterprise. So we'll talk about Stephen Flynn and Tom Arthur later in the episode. But let's just quickly go through some of the ministers and cabinet secretaries where social enterprise will be touching into their portfolios as well. So the first person I wanted to speak about was Gillian Martin, who is the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Rural Affairs. So she was involved previously with the Just Transition and Renewables. She had net zero in her title beforehand. That's still within her responsibilities. She's coordinating cross-government action on net zero. But something that she has specifically in her portfolio is the circular economy. And Duncan, we have a few members who work within the circular economy. So how does that feel to not only have social enterprise represented by a minister, but also the circular economy represented in another?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think, as we say a lot of the time, circular economy, climate change, climate action needs to be a kind of green thread through every policy area actually. So I think that's really, really important. And obviously we work very closely with Circular Communities Scotland, and a lot of their members are of course social enterprises. A lot of our members are social enterprises. I think that's a really, really strong thread. And in terms of the number of green social enterprises, there's a good number there as well, I think, as well, working in upcycling, recycling, nature education, all this kind of stuff. So I think it's a really important topic. And I think it's something we need to not forget about as well. Let's not forget about net zero. Let's not forget about, the green economy. I think that's so important going forward. But again, having that as a green thread throughout everything else, I think that's so important.
Yeah, it's something that's said quite a lot is we're a very good country for recycling, but as the phrase goes, it's reduce, reuse, recycle. So we need to really start practicing the first two and implementing that as well. But the other half of Gillian Martin's portfolio is rural, and we know from our census that over a third of social enterprises in Scotland live in rural areas, whether that's the Highlands and Islands or in the kind of borders in Scotland. The fact that she also has responsibility for rural policy and strategy, and also land reform there. So do you think we could see any kind of differences? Do you think we could see any sort of changes? So we had a specific islands plan that was brought out in the last parliamentary term. Do you think we could see a new specific rural policy that's brought out this term, or even some changes to land reform in the future?
Yeah, I think there was a commitment to a kind of rural Scotland piece of legislation, actually. So it'd be interesting to see what happens with that. And a lot of this stuff is obviously, there's a natural alliance between rural policy and land reform, for example. Not only that, of course, because there's urban land reform, but a lot of these things kind of naturally align with each other. And it's always interesting, I think, to see where different responsibilities lie, actually. We've had these conversations before around, why is that particular policy area in with that one? Does that make sense? Does it not make sense? Because it is a complicated process, I think, for government to do this, actually. But yeah, I think in terms of rural Scotland, we use rural Scotland as a case study on so many occasions in terms of social enterprises, in terms of what's happening in rural areas. Just an incredible, inspiring number of social enterprises. As you said, per head of population, it's far higher than Central Belt, for example. So I think, that's going to be certainly a really important priority area for the government.
So the next Cabinet Secretary I'd like to speak about is Shirley-Anne Somerville, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice and Housing. She's had this portfolio last term as well. She's had housing added to it. Social enterprise was moved from the third sector unit within the government and moved into the economy unit of government a couple of years ago. Responsibility during last term still ended up with Shirley-Anne Somerville, but that's now been changed and rectified. However, she also has responsibility for OSCAR, which is the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator, and the broad third sector. So social enterprise is still part of that third sector. We also have an impact on the economy here. So Shirley-Anne Somerville will definitely be a minister that we'll be keeping an eye on and making sure that anything regards to kind of social justice, tackling poverty and inequality, anytime she needs case studies or anything of the like to emphasise what Scotland's doing at the grassroots level, social enterprise will be there in her portfolio as well. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to say on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Gillian Somerville knows her portfolio really well. I think that's a really important point to make. She has been around in government for a while now as well, so I think she knows that remit really well. And I'm sure she'll be on the case in terms of the calls from SCVO about multi-year funding, for example. She's very, very familiar with these arguments. She's also my local MSP as well in Dunfermline, so I may even rock up to her surgery one day. Maybe talk about social enterprise, who knows. But yeah, she knows that remit really well, I think, as well. So I think people are quite confident in her ability to do that.
I think that's a really good point that we should emphasise, though, is just because your local MSP may be a cabinet secretary or a junior minister doesn't mean they can just ignore the constituents. You should go to their surgeries if you have an issue and you bring it up to them directly. This is a different opportunity to engage with your cabinet secretaries and ministers.
Yeah, I would say in particular, to be honest, as well, if they've got a cabinet position, they're a minister, they're still your local MSP often. So you can still go to them, obviously speak to their office around any issue you have, and they're going to have more influence in government, actually. So it's quite powerful if you've got a cab sec as a local MSP. But obviously don't forget your regional MSPs as well. I always emphasise this. You can and should go to your constituency MSP for any issues you have, but also there's your 7 regional ones as well. I think that number's right. I always get that slightly wrong. I think 7, isn't it?
You're correct.
So you've got 8 MSPs, basically.
8 in total, exactly.
Yeah.
But the next Cabinet Secretary that we'll be speaking about is Mary McCallan, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Education, Culture and Gaelic. So that's quite a big portfolio that she has to work across. But for our members who work in the kind of creative arts sector, she's going to be your go-to for any changes that are happening there, specifically around any policy and support for culture, creative arts and architecture industries, as well as festivals and supporting the creative workforce. So if you're a creative social enterprise out there and you're wondering, how does this cabinet change affect me? Not only do you have a minister working at an economic level for social enterprise, but if you are involved with the arts, Mary McAllen is somebody to focus on there, and she's been a bit of a rising star within the SNP for many years, so I think she's going to work pretty hard in this portfolio section that she's got. Education is obviously a tough thing to have in general, but with the rise in speakers of Gaelic across Scotland, I think there's going to be a bit of momentum in this portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she's got one of the exciting policy asks as well, which is about the universal basic income for artists. Whatever that looks like, kind of thing in practice, but that is a policy commitment, was a commitment I think in the SNP manifesto. So she'll be leading that if they decide to do that in this parliamentary session.
Next up, we have the Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reforms. This is Ivan McKee. So Ivan McKee last parliamentary session was a junior minister. He's now a Cabinet Secretary, so that's a promotion that he's been given by John Swinney. His responsibilities are small in number but big in ambition, I would say. He has to lead the public sector reform of civil service operations and find efficiencies within them. He's also going to be in charge of the Scottish Futures Trust. But for our sector, what's important here is that he's going to be in charge of government procurement and shared services. So big asks that we've been making from Scottish Government is when it comes to the procurement is to open that up to be easier for our social enterprises to access, because every pound spent with a social enterprise emphasises and duplicates the social and environmental impact that they have.
And as you say, he's got, on paper, it looks like quite a small remit in terms of number of words, but that is a very, very big remit, I think, as well. So that's going to be probably the biggest thing of this parliamentary session is public sector reform, if you had to choose one thing, apart from the finances, of course, in general. So he's going to have that's going to be a really difficult job, actually, as well, really transforming public services. Certainly, we hope using more social enterprises, cooperatives, employee-owned businesses within supply chains and delivering local public services. That's one of our key asks ourselves. But yeah, happy to help with your remit at any point, Ivan McGee.
So now we're moving into the kind of junior ministers category. So the first minister that we're going to talk about is the Minister for Public Finance, and that's Hannah Mary Goodland. She's the MSP who won Shetland for the SNP. So this is her first time being elected into Parliament, and she's been being brought into the Cabinet. She has a bit of a background in renewable energy, I believe, and where she comes into play for us is that she's been given the responsibilities for community empowerment and community wealth, as well as estates and property. So does community wealth have an intersection cut into community wealth building? I would say a little bit as well, but due to the background of renewables, I would say there's going to be quite a lot of work around community benefits from renewable energy, whether that's onshore or offshore. So I think there'll be really interesting opportunities there. And again, because she's new to Parliament, she might not be as aware of what social enterprises do. Obviously, being from an island, that's very helpful because we are overrepresented in our island areas and local communities. But I think it's exciting to have a new fresh face and with new ideas in a cabinet position, or a ministerial position, I should say.
And I think this is one of those remits where there's still a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of clarity needed as well around, how does community empowerment, community wealth fit together? How does that fit together with the Community Wealth Building Act? How does this stuff all fit together? We're not quite sure about all of this stuff yet. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out.
Yeah, so next up we've got the Minister for Europe and External Affairs and Energy, so that is Stephen Gethins. Energy is a huge part of his portfolio, and something he has in here is not only energy policy and strategy, but also heat networks and looking at heating and domestic energy transformation. Some of our members who work within the energy industry, whether that's at an administration level or they're actually creating energy, he is in charge of this new strategy for that. So if there's been issues around communities not having funds to repower some of the lines, some of their turbines come down, turbines get old, they need replaced. Stephen Gethins will now definitely have the responsibility for making sure that there's a strategy around that and making sure that Scotland's energy works for it. One of the big campaign slogans that they had at this election from the SNP was "It's Scotland's energy." So I think there's going to be a real push for community ownership here, which is something we had in our manifesto as well.
And I think this is one of those really interesting portfolios where you can't necessarily see the logic straight away as an external observer. So if you look at his job title, Minister for Europe, External Affairs and Energy, it's like, what's the link there necessarily between Europe and energy, kind of thing? There doesn't necessarily have to be a link, of course, but I think sometimes you can read job titles, you're like, oh, how was that decided? How did that happen? So, for example, you could talk about let's combine, health and housing together because there's a direct link there, but that's not happened. So it's interesting and curious, I would say, in terms of some of the responsibilities and how they're lumped together.
Yeah, and a lot of that will come down to what MSP's experience is in the past. So Stephen Gethins in particular has had quite a lot of experience when it comes to working internationally. So he's been involved with the NGO sector all across Europe. He's worked as a special advisor. He's worked in Brussels. And I believe most recently he was part of the senior management team at the University of St Andrews. So I think it's someone who definitely works within that kind of international relations side of things. I think Scotland is consistently put into the kind of top tier tables when it comes to energy production. We had our oil and gas boom from the 70s onwards, but now we're talking about renewables, and I think renewables is definitely something that's going to be leading the conversation within Europe, particularly with what's happening internationally around kind of oil and gas prices. I can see renewables being something that leads European innovation, and I think Scotland will hopefully be very close to that.
And I think he's seen as really having the right skills and the right experience for something as big as that as a role, I think. So there's a lot of these people who are brand new to the Scottish Government as well, who can bring that experience with them.
So next up we have the Minister for Agriculture, Marine and the Islands. That is Jim Fairley. So he was also in this portfolio. Last time it's been expanded a bit. It was agriculture and kind of like farming, but now he's got the islands and marine added in as well. So the reason that we've kind of included him here is because he is solely in charge for any cross-government coordination on islands. And we've discussed previously about how we've got good representation on our islands. So I think anything to do with some of the issues that they have around there, excluding ferries. Ferries will land specifically with Stephen Flynn, but we'll get on to Stephen Flynn later. So anything to do with kind of animal welfare, community growing of food and anything on the islands, Jim Fairley is the minister leading on that.
And again, it's interesting what's in the portfolio as well. I think this is really fascinating as well. So he's got within his remit allotments and community food growing. But obviously within this division, there's not community ownership as a priority as well. So there's lots of overlap between departments, as is natural, as is normal. But it's just, again, interesting how that's been chosen to fit in there as opposed to some other department.
Next up, we have the Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise, so that's Siobhan Brown. And the reason that we've included her specifically is that she is helping within the remit of children and young people with learning disabilities, autism and neurodivergency. We have so many members who work in that area, sometimes looking at children, sometimes just looking at the broader spectrum of those with neurodivergence. So I think that's something that's been acutely pointed out repeatedly, is there's been a kind of a rise in diagnoses of people on the neurodivergent spectrum. I don't think that falls into the category of, we're overdiagnosing this. I think this is just, we're actually coming to terms with there's such a range of what happens inside people's brains that we need to have the right policies in place to make sure that everybody can work and live comfortably and to kind of what helps them,
And I think, every cabinet secretary, every minister is going to have some relevance to some social enterprise. I think that's what we need to always bear in mind. Obviously, social enterprise as a sector is really, really diverse. And as you said, there are a lot of social enterprises working with children and young people, and certainly health and social care as well. So there's a lot of interest, I think, for social enterprises in this role as well.
Next up, we have the Minister for Innovation, Technology and Tertiary Education, Ben McPherson. So Ben McPherson is specifically going to be looking at kind of young people's transitions into work, careers, and working with Skills Development Scotland. Again, that's something that a lot of our members work with, as well as kind of employability and getting young people into work. It's specifically really, really hard for young people to get into work at the minute. So he's also focusing on community learning and development. But there was a report put out recently across, and this is UK-wide, not in Scotland, but there are over 1 million young people who are not in education, not in work, because it's just so difficult to find a job in the current climate. So something needs to change there. There needs to be a lot more help from government. The report that I'm referencing also said there needs to be help from government, and also that there was an acknowledgement from at least UK government that this is a problem that they've seen coming, but didn't do too much about it. So this isn't just AI taking people's jobs, which is funny because Ben McPherson also has the responsibility of the artificial intelligence policy and strategy in Scotland. But this is something that we all need to kind of work together to make sure that young people not only have a voice in Scotland, but have access to jobs here too.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those portfolios that's quite interesting because it seems a bit more logical compared to some others, kind of thing. You can see, naturally how these things fit together. So, for example, technology and tertiary education, I think that's really important.
Yeah, completely. And where it can fit into kind of social enterprises, besides the employability side of things, is specifically within our policy work. We have a university social economy forum that we run with multiple universities across Scotland and across the UK. And we have international colleagues as well who work with us, including Canada and Istanbul. And Ben McPherson has the responsibility here for university research as well. So hopefully we can get him engaged with what's happening within our research forum as well.
We can invite him along as a speaker.
I think that sounds great. Next up, we have the Minister for Victims and Community Safety, and this is Kirsten Oswald, MSP. So specifically around here, there's a lot of kind of tackling antisocial behaviour and community safety, specifically in kind of legal aid. So we've got, again, social enterprises who work in all these sectors as well. So if you're a member who works in that specific area, Kirsten Oswald is definitely somebody to be in touch with as well. She's a very experienced MSP. Well, she's a newly elected MSP, I should say, but she's an experienced MP and has been involved with the SNP for many, many years.
And it seems within this portfolio, this is where the kind of community cohesion theme will fit as well. So community safety, I guess, is the same thing as community cohesion, which is I suppose a theme that came out from the Scottish Government originally, maybe over a year ago now, in response to fragmentation of communities, the rise in hate crimes, these kind of things as well, which is something we're certainly keen on pursuing. In terms of the role of social enterprise in that community cohesion strategy. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what that department does as well.
Next, we have the Minister for Community Care. This is Alison Thewlis. Community care is a new portfolio that's been developed. I think there's been an acknowledgement that when we come to kind of care solutions across Scotland, it has to be locally based and community led. So community care and social care integration in the social service workforce is a key part of Alison Thewlis's new role. We have many, many members who work in kind of care and health. So I think specifically now that we've got a dedicated minister to look into this area, which is an area that's really only going to grow. The need for care in Scotland is only going to go up with our ageing demographics that we have. So it's good that we've got somebody with a ministerial portfolio that has that.
And I suppose it'd be interesting to see how this all fits into the wider, obviously, NHS portfolio, the NHS reform process as well. Because as you said, we all understand that the NHS is, struggling a lot, as it always is, kind of thing. And it's what can we do differently at a local level? How can we empower social enterprises working within the health space, in prevention and early intervention in particular, to really drive, public health forward and relieve burdens on the NHS effectively.
And speaking of health, we're moving on to the Minister for Mental Wellbeing, Public Health, Sport, Alcohol and Drugs, which is Marie Todd, which I believe is the longest ministerial title that we have here. So she has a huge portfolio. So not only does she cover public health, population health, specifically women's health. So there was a dedicated women's health minister last session. That's now been moved into Marie Todd's portfolio. That also has kind of mental health support as well, anything to do with kind of suicide prevention. But specifically something that I wanted to highlight here was that she has the responsibility for social prescribing, which I think falls into this prevention strategy that is trying to get pushed by Scottish Government. We have members who I think definitely could benefit from being the endpoint of social prescribing. I've heard of stories where somebody will go into their GP, say that they're depressed, and instead of prescribing antidepressants, is kind of what happens immediately in some situations when you go to your GP. They were prescribed 2 months free gym pass just to kind of see if that does anything for them. I think these different avenues are definitely worth exploring. I am not saying that exercise is like a cure for depression at all. However, I do think this kind of social prescribing could be a really added benefit to so many people out there.
Yeah, I think it's really welcome to see things like that. And that's a sign of an innovative approach, I think, as well. Social prescribing is so important. As you said, it's about that prevention, about that early intervention. And I think within her portfolio, that's like some of the toughest issues you've got in society there in one portfolio. So that's a very challenging one, to be honest. A lot of controversial stuff as well. A lot of things which are very, very, very personal to people. Sexual health, abortion, maternal health. These kind of things are very, very. People are very passionate about these issues as well. So I think it's a really tough remit she's got there.
And lastly is our kind of very quick summary of ministerial portfolios. And we have the Minister for Equalities and International Development, Samita Kumar. So again, we have so many members who work with refugees, asylum seekers, anyone who's been displaced at all. But she also has the responsibility for equalities. So not only is that kind of New Scots, but that is anything to do with any sort of diversity. So anyone who is disabled, older people, women, gender, LGBTQ plus rights. She has an massive portfolio here of people to work with, and that is something that a lot of our members work directly with, as well as people in kind of these marginalised communities who actually make up the majority of society, but are not appreciated enough, really. I think she's got quite a big portfolio on her hands as well, and as somebody who is new to the cabinet, fresh face, I think there could be a bit of momentum around that as well, because often new ministers or new cabinet secretaries like to make an ambitious start and go with it.
Again, yeah, it's a really challenging remit again as well, like the last one as well. So there's a lot of issues here which are very, very personal to people again as well, and some controversial issues as well. So I think it's a tough remit. And again, if you look at the mix of responsibilities there, you can see some of the logic behind it, but sometimes it's like, why are these things together? So equalities and international development, obviously we can see why in a sense, but also why are they not in a different department? So fair trade, for example, international trade, why are those things not together? Why are they not aligned with each other? Again, there's many reasons why, but so you can see some of the logic, but sometimes it's like, should that be in a different department?
So now for our slightly bigger deep dive. So the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy, Tourism and Transport, Stephen Flynn, and then his junior minister, Tom Arthur, who is the Minister for Business and Fair Work. So Tom Arthur specifically has social enterprise, and that stems from Stephen Flynn's portfolio of the economy. So Stephen Flynn has a huge remit as well. The economy, tourism and transport is massive. Not only do we have members who work in tourism and transport as well, but the overall economic strategy will be coming from these two gentlemen. So economic policy and prosperity is one of the key points within Stephen Flynn's portfolios here. He's also going to be working with the Scottish National Investment Bank, so SNIB. So that'll be a fun conversation for us to have furthermore, is to talk about SNIB. What opportunities are there for them to kind of open up investment into social enterprises and to flourish our sector? He's also going to be in charge of any tourism policy, strategy and support, and of food and drink. So huge remits that he has there. But I think what will be distilled from this, and specifically for social enterprises, will be the responsibility of Tom Arthur. So Tom Arthur's portfolio is for living wage and living hours, employability programmes, effective worker voice including trade unions, workplace employment and equalities including gender, disability, race employment and addressing the pay gap, partnership action for continuing employment, population and migration, business support, policy and promotion, inward investment and global capital investment, digital economy, strategy, participation and connectivity, green free ports and investment zones, subsidy control regime, trade policy and strategy, just transition planning, delivery and monitoring, including the Just Transition Commission, social enterprise, and towns, cities and community strategy, investment, regeneration and development. Now that sounds like an absolute mouthful, and that's a huge plate to deal with. However, social enterprise cuts across every single thing that's been mentioned there, and I think this is a really good and exciting opportunity. So Tom Arthur was the minister responsible for bringing the Community Wealth Building Bill to the Parliament and to getting it passed. He also worked directly with the Independent Report to Government, the IDBM report, Inclusive Democratic Business Model report. So National Strategy for Economic Transformation had Action Plan 44, which is where the IDBM report came from, and then that is completely intertwined with community wealth building. So if there's somebody who is within the thick of it when it comes to social enterprise and economic transformation, it would be Mr. Tom Arthur here. So I think this is actually a really exciting time and a portfolio that he has there. But we've worked with Tom Arthur in the past, and he's worked closely with Neil McInroy, who is a Scottish economist that we work with as part of the Inclusive Democratic Business Model Alliance. So I think there's quite exciting opportunities here with this new cabinet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Tom Arthur knows his remit really well, I think, as well. He was also convener of our social enterprise CPG back in the day, as was Mr. John Swinney as well, so just bear that in mind. So we have a lot of people in government who are real allies of social enterprise, but just really understand it as well. I think that's the thing. I have confidence he really understands it. He really understands community wealth building. He really understands other types of IDBMs as well. I think that's just really important to emphasise. So I think from a sector perspective, I think we're really pleased that he's going to be effectively our minister as well. Again, a really big challenging remit he's got there as well, obviously working alongside Stephen Flynn as well to implement all this. But yeah, hopefully social enterprise will still retain that, that distinctive voice, I think, as well. I'd be confident that would be the case. But it's interesting things like he's got trade policy and strategy within his portfolio, but fair trade was in another department's portfolio as well. So there's these kind of these kind of logical connections between different policy areas, but also why are they separate kind of thing as well. And again, it's not easy to put together these portfolios, I have no doubt about that. But yeah, Samita Kumar has fair trade within their portfolio as well. So yeah, it's interesting how these things are kind of split up. And it'd be interesting to see how they work together across cabinet as well, and across the ministerial portfolios to really implement those things when there is that separation, I think, as well. So that's going to be really crucial thing going forward. But yeah, it's good that social enterprise sits with your living wage and living hours and all the fair work stuff. I think that's really important. So we're pleased about that. We do want to make sure we're still working alongside cooperatives and employee-owned businesses as well, and make sure there's that integration with those business models as well.
But even in getting involved with inclusive democratic business models, there's a clear indication that there's no loss of identity for social enterprises here. We're here in our own right, and we've been given clear responsibility within a minister. So I know that's been a very quick whistle-stop tour of the cabinet and the ministers, but I think there's exciting things to come from. And with those who are being given these new responsibilities, there's definitely things to build from the last parliamentary term as well. And I think could be good reception from the manifesto that we've had, which again wasn't just for the election, it was to help government within these next 5 years as well if they ever need any certain policy proposals to look at. So if you haven't read our manifesto, do give it a read over. We'll be giving that out to cabinet secretaries and ministers as well. So if they're ever stuck for an idea, that's what we're here for. But one of the important things that we plan to do is over this coming summer is to make sure that the new cabinet secretaries and ministers aren't away anywhere else on holiday, that they're having their holidays here and that they're visiting local social enterprises either within their area or within Scotland. So hopefully we can get some of that arranged this summer.
And I suppose in terms of next steps as well, we're all looking forward to the new programme for government and see what that contains as well, and hopefully trying to get some of those, as you mentioned, manifesto policies from our own manifesto within that programme for government, as well as obviously looking at the SNP manifesto primarily to see what policies might pop up in that programme for government as well. And also bearing in mind it's now a rainbow parliament, so we've got other parties with their own demands as well, and they will be working with the SNP as a minority government to see some of their own policies in the programme for government as well. So it'll be interesting just to see what happens with those negotiations as well, actually. But yeah, I think it's a really exciting year ahead for social enterprise and for other IDBMs and for the community wealth building agenda as well. I think obviously Community Wealth Building Act, how does that translate into reality in the real world? How does social enterprise and other IDBMs fit into all that as well? So it's an exciting year ahead, I think, yeah.
Completely, and I think just for a wee timeline on all of this, we expect the programme for government to be out in September, as it usually is. I would expect roughly around that time as well, maybe slightly after, we'll also get our first community wealth building statement from the minister who's in charge of that, which I believe is likely Tom Arthur, but we'll see. These things can change, people will demand certain portfolios. But yeah, just want to say to everybody, thanks for joining us today on this whistle-stop tour of Cabinet Secretaries. Not only will we see you at the next one, but hopefully we'll see you on the 17th of June in Dundee, our Social Enterprise Summit. See you there, hopefully. Thanks for listening, folks. This has been Building Wealth, Building Community, Social Enterprise Scotland podcast with me, Andy Patterson, and Duncan Thorpe. If you need to get in touch at any time about all things social enterprise, please do visit socialenterprise.scot. Goodbye for now.